Okay, I'm not sure exactly where the last thing stopped. What I can tell is my image I'm looking at just freezes. So I believe it's April 19th, 1775, the day the Revolutionary War began. And we have a column of British troops marching toward Lexington, Massachusetts. The first unit to arrive, and picture they're all strung up and down the road. They don't all get there at the same time. It's about 200 men who were fairly recent recruits. They had never seen combat. They're nervous. And when they come marching into town just about daybreak, they find something like 77 members of the Lexington militia milling around on the village green, armed with their muskets. Now, they had enough advance warning. They got out there around midnight and just stood out there in formation, and nobody showed up. They finally got cold, so the ones who lived farther away adjourned to a local tavern to get warmed up, and the others went home. Now they're out there. Here come the British troops. Both groups of men had been sternly warned not to fire without orders. So there they are. The British officer in charge has commanded the Lexington militia to disperse. 77 against 200 is not good odds, so they're walking away just slowly enough to make their point, you know what I mean. And then some idiot fired a shot. Nobody knew who did it then. Consequently, nobody knows who did it now. Probably some brave hero firing from behind a stone wall. You find a lot of those up there. And putting everybody else in danger. Okay, the British regulars, they're green, they're inexperienced. They fire without orders. Got in some trouble for that. Killing and wounded about a dozen or so of the militiamen. The rest of them ran away. I'm told that one man, armed with several weapons, just stood his ground and went down like Rambo. Another mortally wounded man crawled over to his own doorstep and died there in the arms of his wife. That's got to be, you don't even get to know, find out how it turns out. But I'd like to remind people every time I can, history is about people. Obviously, if it's not about people, it's not about anything. And those were real people. Their experience of life, it differs in terms of technology and perhaps culture, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's just the same for people whenever or wherever on the timeline that they live. I don't have time for this. I'm going to do it anyway. The things that happened in the past didn't really happen in the past. They happened in the present, because every day that has ever been was today when it happened. We have always lived and will continue to live on the cutting edge of time. Well, you've had a brief, I don't know if you really can call it an exchange of gunfire. The British soldiers reformed their ranks and marched on in the direction of Concord. Now, by this time, the word is being spread far and wide that the regulars are out. Companies of Minutemen are forming up and marching in the direction of Concord as fast as they can. I might have said Lexington. They're already in Lexington. And there are hundreds of them, eventually thousands converging from miles and miles around. So the British march on out there. It's not but a few miles. Around midday or so, they march into Concord unopposed. But if you look up there at the trees, the bushes, they're moving. They're out there. But they haven't presented themselves. They searched the town. They found some gunpowder. They stuck it in the town pond so it couldn't be used. They accidentally set a building on fire and quickly formed a bucket brigade to put it out. So you're trying not to upset anybody more than they have to. And on the far side of town, there's a stream. Had a wooden bridge over it. It's just too wide and deep just to walk across. And a body of Minutemen came marching up out here in plain sight on the far side of the bridge. The British commander had posted a small detachment to guard against any attack coming over the bridge. He had entrusted that to an extremely young and experienced officer, and you could be a British officer when you're like 17. He made the tactical error of positioning his men on the far side of the bridge instead of the near side. Well, I don't know if this happened or not. Sounds good. But reportedly, the commander of this body of Minutemen said, if there's going to be a war, let it begin here. So there's a very brief exchange of gunfire, and um, total casualties about 3 or 4. And the British soldiers scurried back across the bridge, and the Minutemen did not contest that any further. And that's regarded, I guess Lexington and Concord can haggle about it to the present day, but that's really the first exchange of gunfire in the Revolutionary War. And at the time, it's just something that happened on a day. But the more the years piled up and the decades piled up, people thought that began to realize that was significant. That was a big deal. And along the way, the bridge had sort of rotted and washed out, and they built another one in another location. By the 1830s, only a few doddering graybeard geezers remembered exactly where that bridge had stood, and marking the place seemed like an important thing. So the people of the town commissioned a sculpture, a statue that still stands, and I confuse it with the Minutemen statue at Lexington. But they had a dedication for it in the year 1837. All the intellectuals came out from Boston, and I believe it was Ralph Waldo Emerson composed a 4-stanza poem, which was set to music, and they sang it. And the first stanza was inscribed on the base of the statue, where the first shots had been fired. And people like that, they're not bound by strict rules of history. And generations of school children, not including me, were obliged to memorize it. But I can do the first stanza. And advising you, they don't have a flag. But there you go. So, just what is this about? Let's see if I can call them. I got to get it started here. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here the embattled farmers stood, and fired the shot heard round the world. I want to say, what kind of gun was that? But it's metaphorical, of course. What did he mean by that? Here's what he meant by that. On the day that shot was fired, monarchy was the default form of government for pretty much the whole human race, and had been for several thousand years. It's only been less than 2.5 centuries. And now monarchy it's an endangered species. There are very few monarchies left. And I can only think of one that might actually have some power, and that's Saudi Arabia. The rest are just, ceremonial. I think Denmark has a king, lives in an apartment, drives a Volvo. From time to time, he has to put on his king suit for ceremonial purposes. I've heard that. I can't vouch for it. And the entire concept of where governments get their power has been upended in the last quarter of a millennium, and we put that in play. Historians in Europe and Latin America are much quicker to credit us with that. Historians in our own country, sadly, don't want to report anything good about our country. They want to raise a generation of people to hate the country that their fathers fought for, and to dismiss the values which have been so meaningful to Americans until recently, and should still be. So, if that was not the shot heard round the world, please tell me what was. Got it? Okay. I can't resist this. I always do this in class, so please forgive me. The story goes that somewhere along the way, while they're still flying the space shuttle, NASA considered commemorating the skirmish at Concord Bridge by sending some cows into space. There's a visual for you. Cows in space. What, you may wonder, is the connection? Well, it's quite simple. This would be the herd shot round the world. Sorry. All right, the British, having rested a while, formed up in their columns and began what proved to be a terrifying trek back to Boston. The plan was they would march back to Lexington and then go by road back across the neck into town. This turned into a death march. They got about a half a mile out of Concord and came under heavy fire. There was a tavern and about a 90-degree bend in the road, at which point they came under heavy fire from Minutemen who were concealed behind trees, bushes, and stone walls. So if you can imagine how much iron discipline it would take just to keep in step and march down a sunken road. I don't know if you've seen this. Before they started paving roads, a road would just be like a cow path, horses, foot traffic, wagon wheels, and it would sink. It would sink down maybe 3 or 4 feet below the surrounding ground. The soil's very rocky. Every time a farmer plows up a rock, he throws it up over to the edge. You got stone walls on both sides. So here you are marching along, and every 50 or 100 yards is another nest of Minutemen blasting away at you from point blank range with their muskets. There really wasn't that much difference in those days between a military weapon and a civilian weapon. So if the soldiers perceived that they were taking fire from a building, soldiers would leave the line of march, enter the building, and kill any male of any age, whether they had any reason to think they were firing or not. That's how you win friends and influence people, isn't it? Their discipline was at the point of breaking when they arrived in Lexington to find several hundred more reinforcements awaiting them there. So then reinforced, they marched back into Boston, still under fire. And back in Boston, they called the roll and found that they were 296 men short. They had a fairly heavy 2-digit number of men known dead. They had a 3-digit number of men known wounded, and they had a bunch of others that just weren't there and they didn't know what. So some of them are probably dead, some of them are probably wounded, and I would strongly suspect, since they always had a problem with desertion, some of those guys saw their chance and they took it. They shinny under the fence and lose that red coat and start life over again. But a war has begun. There's no way around it. No way to cover it up. A war has begun. So, should I have asked? Hostilities in the Revolutionary War began on April 19th, 1775. Got it? And the military phase would last, weirdly enough, 6 years and 6 months to the day until a British surrender at Yorktown, Virginia on October 19th, 1781. Okay? What we're going to do now, and I'm going to cut this one off, we could be coming back under the heading of the Revolutionary War. We're going to start with an extended comparison, several comparisons of things that can be measured or counted. We're going to consider the 13 colonies as one country, Britain as another, and compare resources such as populations, financial strength, industrial strength, armies, and navies. And you will see that in every one of them, we are heavily overmatched. If we get through that, you're thinking, are these guys stupid? What made them think they could even survive, let alone win? But when we get through that, we will turn our attention to what I call British special problems. I think I'm the only one who uses that term. There were some realities of the situation here the British weren't ready for. They're going to have to find a way to work around or somehow deal with or make allowances for these problems in order to wage this war successfully. When we get through with that, you may be wondering how the British thought they had a chance to win. And in a sense, really, they didn't. Then we'll look at the strategies the British employed, all unsuccessful. Then we will turn our attention to American special problems. Our list is shorter, but the problems are worse. And then the American strengths. This is messy. This is not clean. Okay, but the things that enabled us to tough this thing out come out in one piece. That's where we're going. It's going to take a while, but there are at least 2, maybe 3 potential essay questions on exam 2 that are wrapped up in that. Okay, that's where we're going next. See you later.